On the early morning of April 23, 2018, a local truck driver was making his usual run along Highway 98. As he drove through the quiet stretch of road, he was the first to notice something unusual: a strange, motionless silhouette lying on the roadside. The sight was so unnatural that he pulled over immediately and called the police. When the officers arrived at the scene, it became clear to them almost instantly. This was not a simple roadside accident. Something far more serious had taken place. The victim's identity was quickly established thanks to documents scattered nearby and a distinctive pendant that left no doubt as to who the person was. But a question immediately began to haunt the investigators. What had really happened in room 15? The patrolmen retraced their steps back to the nearby motel. By the time they arrived, the room had already been partially cleaned. Still, the staff hadn't managed to erase all the evidence. Subtle but telling details remained. Faint, pale stains clung to the bathroom tiles, and on the shower wall, a single palm print lingered. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. Aileen Seiden was born in 1986 and spent her childhood in the warm and lively city of Miami, Florida. She came from an ordinary, hard-working family where values such as respect, responsibility, and kindness were always emphasized. Her relatives recall that from a very early age, Aileen radiated energy and curiosity about the world. She was described as a bright, ambitious, and deeply sympathetic girl, someone who had an open heart and was always willing to lend a hand when others needed support. From childhood, Aileen carried within her a dream: to find her true place in life, to achieve something meaningful, and above all, to build a love that would be real, sincere, and lasting. She was not motivated by wealth or fame, but by the desire to live authentically and to bring warmth to the people around her. Aileen grew up alongside her younger sister, Francesca. The two girls were more than sisters. They were confidants, inseparable companions who could hardly be seen apart. Their relationship was filled with long conversations, laughter, and the kind of trust that only comes from sharing both secrets and vulnerabilities. As they grew older, Francesca became not only a sister, but also a best friend, someone with whom Aileen could share her deepest fears and her boldest dreams. During her school years, Aileen showed herself to be active, curious, and creative. She loved being part of theatrical productions, often taking on roles that allowed her to explore different sides of human nature. She also found joy in writing, contributing regularly to the school newspaper with thoughtful columns that reflected her early interest in people's lives and choices. Teachers remembered her as a student with a sharp and inquisitive mind, someone who listened carefully and asked questions that others overlooked. She had a natural ability to understand her classmates, and whenever someone was treated unfairly, Aileen was the first to step in and offer comfort. Aileen often spoke about her dream of going to college to study psychology. She was fascinated by human behavior and longed to understand why people acted the way they did, what shaped their choices, and how minds healed after difficult times. This passion was not academic alone. It came from her genuine desire to help others. Like many teenagers, Aileen experienced challenges: first love, inevitable disappointments, and the quiet ache of early losses. Yet, even during such moments, Francesca recalled that her sister's optimism never fully faded. Aileen believed in light even in the middle of dark times. Her room reflected her personality. The walls decorated with posters of her favorite music groups, shelves filled with books, and little notes she wrote to herself with encouraging reminders that everything will be okay. She poured her thoughts into diaries, where she chronicled her hopes, her worries, and her determination to keep moving forward. After graduating high school, Aileen began working part-time jobs, both to support her mother and to save for her education. She valued independence greatly, never wanting to rely on anyone else for her future. Her first job was as an assistant in a hair salon, an experience she later described as her first taste of adulthood. There, she learned responsibility, discipline, and the satisfaction of earning her own money. In her free time, she pursued activities that kept her grounded. Yoga brought her calm. Drawing gave her a way to express herself visually, and the idea of starting a personal blog lingered in her thoughts. Her friends remembered her as someone who could make any conversation interesting. More importantly, she was a person who listened deeply, without judgment, creating a safe space for others to share their stories. Ironically, it was this very openness and trust that sometimes left her vulnerable. Aileen wanted to believe in the goodness of people, even when reality suggested caution. Yet this vulnerability was also part of what made her beloved. People knew they could turn to her not just for advice, but for understanding. Though her youth was not free from struggle, it was filled with sincerity, hope, and inner strength. She adored the ocean, often visiting the beach to watch the waves and write reflections in her notebook. She could sit for hours, observing the horizon, finding peace in the rhythm of the sea. Those close to her knew that Aileen was never afraid to dream big. In one of her diaries, she wrote words that seemed to define her entire outlook on life. Her wish to one day do something important that would help people. As a teenager, Aileen often showed a level of maturity that surprised even adults. While many of her peers were preoccupied with parties, appearances, or the usual dramas of adolescence, she gravitated toward people who needed care and understanding. One of her closest friendships was with a girl from school who was quietly enduring hardships at home. Aileen, sensing her struggles even without words, began inviting the girl over to her house, offering her a place where she could feel the warmth and safety of a real family environment. That simple act of kindness spoke volumes about Aileen's character. She did not judge. She did not pry. She simply opened the door and made space for someone who had nowhere else to go. Her natural empathy set her apart. She felt the emotions of others deeply, sometimes more than her own. Teachers noted that Aileen was the type of student who would defend the quietest classmate, the one who sat in the back row unnoticed. One story her family remembered vividly was the day she discovered a stray kitten near a grocery store. The tiny animal was cold, trembling, and clearly in need of care. Without hesitation, Aileen scooped it up, took it home, and nursed it back to health. She named the kitten Luna, and for many years Luna was her faithful companion, often sleeping on her bed and curling up beside her whenever she wrote in her diaries. To Aileen, caring for Luna wasn't just about looking after a pet. It was a way of affirming her belief that even the smallest life deserved love and protection. Her parents would later say that responsibility came naturally to her. Unlike many children who had to be pushed to complete chores or schoolwork, Aileen seemed to understand instinctively that being responsible was a way of giving stability to the people around her. She often took on tasks without being asked, cooking simple meals, helping her younger sister with homework, and checking in on elderly neighbors. By the time she entered high school, her interests were already leaning toward the field of psychology. What fascinated her most was trauma psychology, the study of how wounds, both visible and invisible, shape human behavior. She wanted to understand why people trusted, why they betrayed, why some healed while others remained stuck in cycles of pain. Her curiosity was not born out of detached academic interest, but out of a sincere wish to help people rebuild themselves. Although she came across as gentle and soft-spoken, those who knew her well understood that she had a strong inner core. That strength allowed her to keep moving even when life threw obstacles her way. Friends frequently turned to her during their own crises. Yet her youth was not without complexity. Behind her kindness, she carried her own unanswered questions about love, about trust, and about what it really meant to find a safe place in the world. These questions lingered quietly, waiting for answers that life would one day provide. By the age of 31, Aileen seemed to be standing on firmer ground. She had built a modest but stable life for herself. She worked steadily, contributed to her family, and stayed connected with old friends. On the surface, things appeared to be moving in a promising direction. But it was also during this time that her personal journey took an unexpected turn. She became involved in an unusual romantic arrangement that would later raise many questions. This chapter of her life began when she met two new people, Zachary Abel and Christina Araujo. Both of them would profoundly shape her future. Zachary was a charismatic, outspoken man who owned a local auto repair shop. His charm was immediate, his energy magnetic, and Aileen found herself drawn to his confidence almost instantly. Christina, in contrast, was quieter, more introspective, but she carried a mysterious aura that made people curious. Together, the three formed what is sometimes described as a trinity or triad relationship, an unconventional arrangement in which all three were partners to one another. At first, for Aileen, it felt like something novel but genuine. She had been searching for emotional depth and the promise of stability, and this new dynamic seemed, at least initially, to offer both. However, as time passed, the bright exterior of the relationship began to reveal cracks. What looked like unconditional love from the outside started to show elements of instability. Disagreements arose, jealousy surfaced, and emotional turbulence became common. What had started as an experiment in connection gradually turned into something that drained her. Friends and family noticed the changes. Aileen became more withdrawn, less talkative, and often appeared tense in situations where she used to be lively. While she did not openly complain, she occasionally confided in her sister or close friends, hinting at moments of unease. She admitted, only once or twice, that she sometimes felt uneasy around her partners, especially Zachary. Still, she remained in the relationship, perhaps out of fear of loneliness, or perhaps because she clung to the hope that things might improve. Friends described their trio as strange, but at first glance functional. They lived under the same roof, worked side by side, and even entertained the idea of starting a business together. Their lives seemed woven into a single thread, too closely intertwined to separate easily. Zachary ran a small but steadily growing car business, and both Aileen and Christina worked there with him. What on the surface might have looked like teamwork and mutual support gradually turned into something else, another form of dependency. Their personal lives and professional responsibilities became one, and Aileen was pulled deeper into a web where her freedom of choice seemed to shrink with each passing day. According to her friends, Aileen understood this imbalance all too well. She realized she was losing not only her independence, but also her ability to make decisions for herself. Yet, despite the awareness, she hesitated to break free. Fear held her back. And that fear was not unfounded. Christina's father worked in law enforcement, and the mere thought of walking away filled Aileen with uncertainty. She may have wondered, if I speak up, will anyone even believe me? If I try to leave, who will protect me? These questions kept her silent, chained by doubts and the potential consequences. By the beginning of 2018, the dynamics in the relationship shifted. Something in Aileen began to stir. She quietly entertained the thought of breaking away, of reclaiming her own path. She picked up the phone more often, reaching out to her friends again, discussing possibilities that hinted at a new chapter, moving to another city, finding a new job, starting from scratch. To an outsider, these conversations might have seemed like casual musings, but for those who knew her well, they were subtle yet powerful signals. Aileen was preparing for a change. She wanted to start her life over. No one, however, could measure the urgency behind those signals or anticipate how little time remained. That spring, the trio planned a trip to Florida. Officially, it was framed as a work-related journey. To others, it might have seemed routine, just another drives down the sunlit highways of the southern state. Yet, for Aileen, this trip carried an undercurrent of unease. She left Miami in the company of people she no longer fully trusted, perhaps even feared, but necessity forced her hand. In her private messages to friends, her tone betrayed something she could not put into direct words. Her voice, captured in brief notes and texts, carried anxiety, a quiet plea for someone to notice. But she never wrote the words, "Help me." Her messages were more like a cry from the depths of her heart, disguised as ordinary conversations. And because they were disguised, they went unheard. Many questions echo today, as though suspended in time. Why did she agree to go on this trip? what truly unfolded in those final weeks leading up to the tragedy. Why did no one step in before it was too late? The answers, if they exist, lie hidden in fragile psychological threads. The bonds of loyalty, dependence, and fear that often tie people to situations they know are wrong but feel powerless to escape. In her last conversations with loved ones, Aileen spoke with a spark of hope. She said she would visit soon. She said she was ready to make a new start. She spoke of changes she believed were inevitable, almost as though she had glimpsed them already. But at the same time, there was a shadow in her words, a premonition that her fate had already taken a wrong turn. She felt something approaching, something she could not name, yet could not ignore. The story of Aileen Seiden is more than a personal tragedy. It reflects a larger reality of how love, which should bring support and joy, can be reshaped into a tool of control and isolation. Her life reminds us that not every love story ends in happiness, and that silence, when born out of fear, can carry devastating consequences. Spring of 2018. Florida's roads stretched endlessly under the tropical sun, bordered by pine forests, palm trees, and the shimmering waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Along those highways, Aileen Seiden traveled with Zachary Abel and Cristina Araujo. To outsiders, it looked like nothing more than an ordinary road trip, the kind thousands of travelers make every day. The official explanation was business. According to their acquaintances, an attempt to take a break from the tense routine. But as the investigation will show, behind the wheel of this trip was not a desire for change, but growing tension, fear, and, perhaps, pre-planned evil. The trip, which lasted only a few days, will end on an unmarked stretch of road in Franklin County, next to a cheap motel. Checking into the Sportsman's Lodge, located on the edge of a wooded area, would not have raised any suspicions. It was a typical coastal establishment. Wooden walls, faded curtains, minimal comfort. Zachary had registered the room in his name. Room 15. The night of April 22nd to 23rd passed, seemingly peacefully. However, it was during these hours, behind closed doors, that what would later be described as one of the most brutal crimes in the history of the region took place. The room, abandoned after the guests checked out, attracted the attention of the staff. The bed was turned over. There was a strange odor in the bathroom, and something sticky covered the tiles. This was the beginning of a chain that would soon lead investigators to a terrible discovery. In the early morning of April 23, 2018, a local truck driver was driving along Highway 98. It was he who first noticed an unnatural silhouette on the side of the road. He stopped and called the police. The body was found several kilometers from the motel. The officers who arrived at the scene immediately realized that this was not an accident, but something much more serious. The identity was established thanks to documents found nearby, as well as a unique pendant, which, according to her sister, Aileen had been wearing since childhood. Everything pointed to cruelty, unprovoked rage, and attempts to cover her tracks. The question that immediately arose in the police: what happened in room 15? The patrolman headed back to the motel. The room had already been cleaned, but the employees did not have time to clean everything. There were pale stains on the bathroom tiles, traces of vinegar on the floor, and a palm print on the shower. Forensic experts would later determine that this was an attempt to clean up the scene, but it was done hastily. The surveillance cameras were not working, making it difficult to reconstruct the events. However, the guest list was preserved, and Abela and Araujo were the last names on it. At first glance, nothing added up. Why did her two closest people leave the hotel immediately after the incident without telling anyone? Where were their phones? And why did the signal suddenly stop that night? The answers began to emerge gradually. One of the motel employees recalled the couple's strange behavior when they left. They carried some rags, quickly loaded the car, and drove away silently without saying hello. This was uncharacteristic. In the previous days, they had behaved relaxed, even friendly. The next clue came when Aileen's family began receiving disturbing text messages. One of her friends, known by the pseudonym Allie, said that the day before Aileen disappeared, she had texted her, If anything happens, look for Christina and Zach. The message was short, almost playful at first, but now it sounded like a deathbed warning. Allie immediately passed a screenshot to the police. It became the first unofficial evidence. Everything pointed to Aileen feeling threatened. Perhaps she was trying to escape the relationship. Perhaps the conversation at the motel had ended in an argument. Or perhaps the decision had already been made, and she knew it. The physical evidence was sparse, but it spoke loudly. The use of vinegar, a typical attempt to hide DNA. But most importantly, a palm print on the shower rod. The couple who left the motel returned to Miami. They lived as if nothing had happened. They worked, visited cafes, even smiled in photos posted on social networks. However, panic was hidden inside this picture of calm. Zachary began to make strange calls. Christina began to distance herself from her friends. It would later turn out, these days they already knew that they would be hunted. Their behavior changed. The tragedy that unfolded in an ordinary motel room seemed almost surreal. Aileen, a kind, sympathetic woman who had strived for love and understanding all her life, died not at the hands of a stranger, but presumably at the hands of those she loved. Perhaps the most terrible thing about this crime was betrayal. Betrayal by those she trusted. It was this detail that shocked her family and friends the most. The crime had already happened. The question now was different. Would the investigators be able to prove guilt, and would it be possible to achieve justice in court? The investigation into Aileen Seiden's murder began within hours of her body being discovered. Franklin County Police quickly secured the scene, calling in forensics and a crime scene team. To the casual observer, it looked like a sudden crime, but experienced officers knew that even the most perfect cover-up leaves traces. You just have to look closely. The first stage was technical, surveying the area, collecting evidence, searching for traffic camera footage, and questioning potential witnesses. Despite the fact that the section of the highway was sparsely populated, detectives found an abandoned forest road nearby, along which, judging by the tire tracks, the car had entered and exited during the night. The direction coincided with the route taken by Aileen and her companions. An analysis of the soil at the site where the body was found revealed the presence of chemical compounds, in particular, traces of vinegar and household cleaning product. This was the first clue. The criminals were trying to cover their tracks. But why? Why the rush? Meanwhile, in Miami, 700 kilometers away from the crime scene, Aileen's loved ones were already starting to panic. Her mother tried to call her daughter, but to no avail. Aileen's friends, not receiving messages from her, started contacting each other. They all said the same thing. Aileen never just disappeared. She always answered, even if she was busy. This silence was alien to her character. The first posts with calls for help began to spread through social networks. One of her close friends, Allie, uploaded a photo of Aileen with the caption, "If you've seen her, contact me." This doesn't look like her. These posts were seen not only by subscribers, but also by police officers, who had already begun to analyze the girl's digital footprint. Employees of the data department quickly established that the last active signal from Aileen's phone came from the Apalachicola area. That's where the Sportsman's Lodge motel was located. The officers requested a list of the previous 3 nights' occupants. Among those listed were 3: Zachary Abel, Christina Araujo, and, through one of them, Aileen Seiden. All 3 had checked out of the room on the morning of April 23rd, a few hours before the body was discovered. At that point, the investigation moved from the uncertainty stage to the suspicion stage. Room 15 had already been cleaned, but at the investigators' request, the motel staff provided access to backup materials, old towels, bags of linen, even the water used for cleaning. There were barely noticeable traces on the bathroom tiles that could not be completely washed away. A thin web of evidence began to form. Everything pointed to the fact that Aileen was killed in the room. At the same time, the police began to study the phones of the suspects. First, geolocation. Zachary's phone turned off at about 4:12 a.m., almost at the same time as Aileen's phone lost signal. Christina's phone stopped transmitting data at about 5 a.m. The reconstructed routes showed that both phones were in the area of the motel, then in a forested area, and then on the highway towards Miami. But this was not enough to indict. Direct evidence was needed: DNA, fingerprints, confessions, or recorded behavior that betrayed guilt. The operatives went to Miami. There, they began covert surveillance of Zachary and Christina. The couple behaved tensely. They hardly left the house, stopped contacting mutual friends, and social networks froze. At the same time, investigators received a search warrant for their car. Inside the car, they found traces of cleaning products, disposable gloves, and a plastic container. This evidence would be key in the future trial, but one of the most powerful pieces of evidence came from an unexpected place. Christina Araujo, under pressure from internal fear and external surveillance, called her father one day. He was a retired police officer. That evening, she said, "Dad, I can't do this anymore. It's out of control." He asked what she was talking about, but Christina remained silent. 2 hours later, her father contacted the police. This was the turning point. The investigators realized that someone in this story was cracking at the seams, and perhaps the conspirators would turn on each other. After a series of interrogations lasting several days, the investigators obtained the first confessions. Not all at once, not in full, not in detail, but enough to obtain arrest warrants. Christina gave fragmentary testimony. She claimed that she didn't know it would go this far. According to her, Aileen and Zachary had a fight, and she allegedly failed to stop the conflict. Detectives noted this was the first gap in their version. Earlier, the couple claimed that Aileen left on her own. Now, Christina admitted that her death was not an accident. Investigators continued to increase the pressure. It turned out that a few days before the trip, Aileen and Zachary had a serious conflict related to control and aggressive behavior. Some of Aileen's friends said that she seriously considered ending the relationship and was afraid of the reaction. A strange incident was also discovered. The day before the trip, Aileen tried to cancel her hotel reservation twice. Why she went anyway remains a mystery. Perhaps pressure, perhaps persuasion. Or maybe at that moment she still hoped that everything could be resolved peacefully. Questions were piling up. Why didn't Christina, knowing what was happening, stop Zachary? Why didn't they call for help? Only partial evidence provided answers. Meanwhile, forensic scientists continued to work. On the shower rod in the motel, they found a clear palm print in a stain left by the cleaning solution. The lab confirmed it was Zachary Abel's print. His defense would later try to claim that the print was left during normal use of the shower, but an examination would show that it was left at a moment of strong physical pressure. Moreover, the trace coincided with the moment when all the rugs and curtains disappeared from the bathroom. The evidence began to fall into place. The motel, traffic cameras, text messages, prints, witness statements. The car the couple used to return to Miami was found, and the car was found to contain traces of cleaning products and items with DNA. But no arrests had been made yet. Investigators were preparing warrants and building a database because they knew that the slightest mistake would give the suspects a chance to escape. When the case was handed over to the prosecutor's office, it became clear that the evidence base was serious. In addition to physical evidence, there was Christina's testimony, digital traces of phones, routes, evidence of concealment of traces of the crime. The main thing is that the police had a clear understanding of the motives. Relationships built on power, control, manipulation, an attempt to cover their tracks, and then a cold flight. The investigation took less than 2 months. This is fast, by the standards of complex criminal cases. And yet, in this speed, one could feel not only the professional skill of the investigation, but also something else: the determination to achieve justice. Aileen was not just another victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a person who deserved better. The investigation didn't bring her back, but it did one important thing. It shed light on what went on behind the closed door of a motel room. and then all that was left was to wait for the trial. The trial for the murder of Aileen Seiden began in the summer of 2019, just over a year after her tragic death. There were two defendants, Zachary Abel and Cristina Araujo. The charges were serious: aggravated intentional homicide, obstruction of justice, and perjury. The case generated great public interest. The media actively followed every step, and Aileen's name became a symbol of youth, defenselessness, and fragile faith in those close to her. The courtroom was full. Aileen's family, journalists, activists, even strangers who were touched by her story. In the prosecution's bench were prosecutors confident in their evidence. On the defense side were lawyers trying to build a defense on an alleged accident and the emotional instability of the accused. The court had to answer, was this a deliberate crime, or did it all happen spontaneously? Prosecutors began with the main point, a chronicle of Aileen's last days. The jury was shown videos and text messages confirming that the girl had no intention of disappearing. They showed messages in which Aileen shared her worries about the upcoming trip with friends. One of the texts read, "If all goes wrong, look for me at the motel." The phrase hung in the air, like a premonition of her own death. The court froze. Some of those present held back tears. The key moment was the speech of the investigators who led the investigation. They methodically presented evidence: a route map, DNA tests, video from surveillance cameras, geolocation data from phones. Particular attention was paid to Zachary's palm print found in the bathroom. This was circumstantial but strong evidence of complicity in causing the injuries. Then Cristina Araujo was called to court. She was already under a partial cooperation agreement, and her testimony was the turning point. She spoke quietly, her voice trembling. She claimed that she was afraid at the moment of the conflict and did not know how to stop Zachary. According to her, everything happened suddenly and felt like a burst of rage. But prosecutors recalled that she did not call the police, but on the contrary, she helped clean up the tracks. Her actions after Aileen's death spoke louder than any words. The prosecutor concluded, "Fear is no excuse when it comes to complicity in concealing a crime." Moreover, the messages from the day before showed that she was not planning a party, but was worried about the state of her relationship with Zachary. Aileen's parents spoke in court. The mother spoke simply and sincerely. "I wake up every day with one thought. Where would my daughter be today?" The father added, "We didn't just lose a child. We lost a future. We lost dreams." These words did not leave either the jury or the spectators indifferent. Some of those present later said that this was the hardest moment in the entire trial. Aileen Seiden's story became a reminder. Behind the beautiful photos on social media, anxiety, fear, and violence can hide. And often, it is the loved ones we trust who can be the source of the threat. This case showed how important it is to listen to your inner voice, not ignore alarm signals, and speak out about what seems wrong. After several weeks of hearings, the parties concluded their deliberations. The jury retired to consider its verdict. It took them almost 3 days. The judge read the verdict in complete silence. Zachary Abel, found guilty on all major counts. Life imprisonment without parole. Cristina Araujo, found guilty of accessory after the fact, but given her cooperation with the investigation, received 15 years in prison.